This is Artist Materials from Il Libro dell'Arte. Her Ladyship Marion Forester is going to talk about the subject. Thank you.
And give us just a minute. We have a cranky young man. Nikki, okay? Okay. Okay. Go up to your room, okay? Okay. 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 I love you, honey. Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. I have a 5-year-old. Yeah, so you are in the right class if you are interested in artist materials. And a little bit about me. I am from the barony of Cairta, or the Denver metro area in the Outlands, for anybody who's not from the Outlands. I've been in the SCA for about 21 years, and that has been spread out over North Shield, Middle, Callantyre, and now the Outlands. I am not a professional artist, but I do a lot of research and writing in my modern life. And so that's something that really gets me excited about the SCA. I've been doing Scribble for about 15 years now, and pigments, and then expanded into different Scribble supplies for about 4 years ago. 5 years ago was the first time I made paint. So that's very exciting. And currently I am the Kingdom Minister of Arts and Sciences. So if you have any ideas about arts and sciences in the kingdom, please let me know. And the way I take questions is, please interrupt me. If you don't feel comfortable just shouting them out, put them in the chat, and Lissa will handle that and let me know when there's a question. I'll also pause after each section and give people a chance to ask questions, but I don't want anybody getting lost. So let's garb ourselves, as Sanini suggests, with passion, humility, obedience, and dedication, and let's begin to learn. So what we're talking about today is Il Libro dell'Arte, written by Cennino Cennini, and we don't know exactly when he wrote it. We don't know exactly when he was born or died. We have some general ideas, but he was apprenticed to Agnolo, and this was one of the best painters at that time. So he was pretty, he at least said he was apprenticed to this guy. So he hopefully he knew his stuff. It was written about in the 1400s in Italy, and has instructions on all sorts of things like drawing and painting on parchment and walls, stone and cloth, gilding, making mosaics with quills, eggshells, paper, all sorts of different stuff. And I am not going to get into everything like this, but that's an overview of what is in there. So the artist materials we're going to talk about today. Materials to draw on, materials to draw or paint with. We're going to talk about oil, some flour paste, gilding mordants, and making shell gold or silver. So starting out on what to draw with. They had a lot of different options, and for different tasks you use different things. We'll talk about prepared panels, parchment, paper, and tinted paper. So preparing a panel, this is probably where you would have started learning how to draw. And Cennini tells us that you start with a boxwood panel, about a semesso or about 6 inches square. There's also fig wood mentioned in a different chapter, and parchment that had been primed and coated with calcined bone, which we'll talk about pretty soon. What you do is you wash this down and rub it smooth so that you have a nice smooth surface to work on. And then, since all the measurements back then were so precise, you prime it with half a bean of calcined bone. And we don't know exactly what kind of bean that was. Apparently, they had lots of different kinds of beans. So make your best guess. And evenly coat and dry. And so you're combining your bone, your white bone, with saliva. And I've tried this, and here's your warning. Number one, don't do this with a big wind. And number two, you probably want to put your saliva onto your panel before you add your bone. Otherwise, when you spit onto your panel, you're going to get a whole face full of calcined bone, which is very fun, I can tell you. But this works remarkably well. What you're doing is making kind of a rough surface for silver point, and that's how you're going to begin drawing. And Chinini says, use whatever. You can use nature as your model. You can use the work of the masters, choose one master and work off of that. But this is a really fun, easy way to start. So to make your calcined bone, he gives you instructions. And to do this, take the wings and thigh bones of a chicken or capon, which I believe is a kind of a rooster, and other sources from, you can find these in Artist Materials by Merrifield. She has a whole bunch of different medieval and Renaissance sources. In that book, it says you can use any kind of bone or stag's horn. I found that this is not easy. I get a lot of grays and not much white. And what you really need is a lot of oxygen. And that may be my problem in Denver here. He also says to use old bone, which is possibly less dense, and maybe that makes a difference. He says to use bone that has been left in the rushes for a while. So I'm assuming very dry. Put them in the fire until white, which is the tricky part, and then grind them on the slab that you use for grinding pigments and making paint. So now you can use different colors of paper. And if you look online and do a search of like Da Vinci drawings, you're going to find a lot of colored papers. And these are really fascinating. And all of these papers have a little bit of that calcined bone in them. If you look at the right side of the picture there, you'll see a dark line on each of those. And that's me testing out silver point. So we'll talk about silver point in a few minutes, but two different kind of styluses were usually used to draw, silver point and lead point. The big difference is silver point, you need some sort of abrasive to write on. If you just try and write on paper or parchment, you're not going to get a mark. And they were using kid parchment, which is goat. And the colors, he says, green turnsole, indigo, reddish flesh color, and greenish gray. And if you look, not all of my colors turned out how I kind of expected them to. I followed his instructions and my peach turned out green. My green turned out brown, and my tawny was not very bright. But that may be a difference in my materials as opposed to what he was expecting people to use. What to draw with? Again, silver point, lead, pen and ink, and different washes, and we'll go through each of these. So lead is the easiest. You don't need any kind of abrasive, so you can draw right on a panel, you can draw right on paper or parchment, and they were using all of those. It's a combination of 2 parts lead and 1 part tin, and your downside is that it is toxic, especially if you are a developing child. You're not going to get a whole lot of this, but you don't want to be licking your stuff. It's not as fine of a point generally, and not quite as easy to do shading like silver point is. But you don't have to prepare your paper, and when you're done drawing, you can, if you make a mistake, just take the soft part of a loaf of bread and you can use that as your eraser. Chinini says you should practice drawing for a year with a stylus before progressing to pen and ink. So this is a long-term endeavor, and be kind to yourself if you're learning to draw. Silver point is a lot of fun. If you're looking at a modern source for this, go to Natural Pigments. They have styluses and silver point and all the grounds you need. Although they say silver tip, you can put it in a stylus made of silver or brass. It has a much finer tip and it's easier to do shading or details. If you're looking to save money, just buy a coil of silver wire and you can use that to draw. And of course, the downside is you do have to prepare your paper with bone ash. So drawing advice, Chinini says start simple, use a model, use soft light from the left, and you'll see that in a lot of different manuscripts, seeing the light coming from the upper left and your shadow on the bottom right. And he says draw a little bit every day so that you don't get frustrated. He also goes into cutting a quill for preparing yourself to do pen and ink. He says to use a goose quill, and this is going to be a dry goose quill. You want it to dry for at least a year. Modernly, a lot of times we will speed that up by tempering it in like hot sand or something like that. The process, he gives some of the process, but not all of it. You're going to want to remove the barbs, the feather part, and then clean out the membrane in the quill. If you don't do that, you won't have a nice place for your ink to flow. Scoop out the sides of your quill and shape it. And if you're interested in doing something like this, there are a lot of good videos online. And of course, don't forget to cut the slit to allow your ink to flow. Otherwise, you're not going to get anything going. Washes. This is kind of my favorite part because I like to make pigments. And these are really easy pigments to make for the most part. Washes can add color and shading to drawings. And if you look at the Da Vinci drawings, again, you'll see a lot of washes. He does a lot of silver point, and some of those goes over with pen and ink. Some of the drawings online, you can see that maybe Da Vinci has started the drawing and his apprentice has finished it. So teaching people how to draw there. To make a wash really easy, a couple of drops of ink in a walnut shell full of water. I'm estimating a walnut shell is about a tablespoon, so it's not a whole lot. And then add more ink to create darker shadows. He also says about colored washes. So the bottom picture there is columbine. And when you add that to alum and a little bit of calcium, you get a green color, just like you would with iris flowers, which watch out for now. We're getting close to the time. The upper picture there, I've shaded a little bit with blackberry, and it's just blackberry that's been squished and strained through cloth. And then you add a little bit of alum to stabilize the color, and you may need a little bit of gum arabic to help it stick to your paper. Making tracing paper. This is kind of fun. So if anybody tells you that tracing is not period, just tell them I have documentation and ignore them. Chinini gives 3 ways to make tracing paper with parchment, glue, and paper. So starting out with parchment, very thin parchment scraped until it barely hangs together. And if you want to make it more transparent, rub it with a little bit of linseed oil on cotton and allow it to dry for a few days. And they were doing tracing not only of their master's works, but also works that other people had done. I believe Chinini says that you can take it to like a church or whatever, put it on the wall, and then trace what has been done. And you can do that in the church you're working on. But as you can see, it works pretty well. A little bit of linseed oil helps it become nice and transparent. Glue tracing paper. So I did not include the actual picture here so that I don't run into any copyright, but there is a link, and I can get you my slides afterwards so that you can check that out. But there are some examples of this that still survive, and they're really impressive. So what you're doing is taking fish or portion glue, which is apparently like a hide glue, boiling it to dissolve, strain it a few times, and then brush it onto greased marble. I have not gotten this to work yet, so we'll see how that goes. And then you can apply boiled linseed oil, I assume, so that it doesn't stick to what you're putting it up against. When dry, peel it up and allow it to dry for a couple of days. And like I said, with this example, 14 by 13 inches, that's pretty big. They're copying significant things here. And finally, they did use paper as well. And this is handmade paper someone made for me. And again, you're just greasing it so that it becomes a little bit more transparent. It does work though. You can see a little bit on the bottom there where I was able to trace on my book. Charcoals. These are really fun and easy to make. I love making black pigments. Willow sticks cut in pieces about as long as your palm. Please sharpen before charring. I have tried sharpening after charring and it just kind of breaks. But if you sharpen before you char it, it works a lot better. Chinini says to tie it in a bundle with wire and put it into a sealed casserole. And what you're doing there is you're taking away a lot of the oxygen. So it's not turning white, it's turning black all the way through. When I'm doing this at home, I have a cast iron pipe fitting with 2 end caps, and I throw that in the fire with whatever I have inside of it, whether it's willow pieces for making charcoals or almond shell or something for making pigments. But it takes about an hour maybe in a nice hot fire. Chinini says check it, and if it doesn't look good, put it back in the next day. And he's using a baker's oven after the baker is done using it. So kind of working with what you got and working with something cheap. And he does go through paints and pigments. That's such a big subject that we're not going to go through it right now, but here are a lot of the ones that he mentions. And if you have any questions on paints or pigments, please talk to me at another time. I love talking about pigments. Okay, we're going to go into a different section soon, so does anybody have any questions? Get a quick drink of water here. Okay, so the next section is kind of what you draw, what you can paint with. So miniver brushes. Miniver is a type of squirrel, also called ver. Chinini says that your tail should be cooked and doesn't really give any other information as to what cooked means or why you should do it. My theory, which there are 2 different translations, 2 main translations of Chinini's book out there. The first one is the Craftsman's Handbook, Il Libro dell'Arte, and it is about $10 on Amazon. If you are an artist in the SCA, you know, in the visual arts, this is probably a good book to pick up, especially if you're into illumination. Now, if you really get into it crazy, there is another translation just called Il Libro dell'Arte by Laura Brocchi. And she has both the English translation and the Italian transcription and a whole bunch of her notes. And she agrees with me that the reason for cooking is to get rid of the parasites that may be hanging out in your animal tail. I've tried cooking and non-cooking, and I don't notice a whole lot of difference in the quality of my brush. The ferrule, which is your kind of the part that joins the handle and your brush head, it is made of feather, and it all depends on what kind of a brush, how big, and what kind of feather you're going to use. Whether it's a dove for fine detail work, or I believe a vulture is the biggest that's denoted. And normally what I use is duck. It seems to be about a nice size for most things. And let's see. And then you have your handle, which is just made of wood. If you're making these at home, I highly suggest just going with a stick from like a craft store or like a dowel. And you're just making that into a spindle shape. I do that on a power sander at home. And your last things that you really need are some sort of thread to tie it. Chinini says to use waxed silk, and that's what I've used there. Um, my top brush is also, I believe, mink or marten, and squirrel is not the only thing they used, but it's the only thing that Chinini mentions. If you're looking for other kinds of furs, I can give you those at another time. I do have a handout on how to make brushes. And I use a little bit of glue to stick my handle to my ferrule, and a little bit of gum arabic a lot of times just to stick the pieces of fur together. It also helps keep a nice point on your brush. So the process of making this. Now, Chinini doesn't say this, but I do soak your feather shafts for a little while, and this helps you to be able to cut the feather shaft so that it doesn't splinter. He says to pull out your hairs in little bunches and then wet them, and wetting them sticks them together and makes them so that they're not flying all over. Tie them with thread or wax silk. And then I'm cutting my ferrule when I have a bundle about the right size. Put the hair bundle into your ferrule. I dip the handle in glue just to help everything stick together a little bit. Sometimes you will see thread wrapped around the ferrule to keep everything together. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you will see both in the same manuscript. So it's really up to you whether you're wrapping thread around the outside to tie it down or not. And then stick your handle in the other side. Pretty quick, pretty easy, but it takes a lot of work to get good at it.
Your ladyship,
Yes.
Aspasia has a question. Can you use human hair?
Try whatever you like. I have not seen any documentation for it, but it all depends on the properties of the hair, how much they kind of keep your water and paint and stuff, and the taper of your hair. Human hair may not be stiff enough, but you're more than welcome to try. I have seen cat hair as documented something that was used. So if you have a cat, there you go. And yeah, be kind to your cat. Any other questions?
That's everything in the chat.
Awesome. Okay. Bristle brushes. These I don't think were quite so much used for painting, but more for applying your gesso to your panel and things like that. You were using white domestic boar. I'm not quite sure why the white, but there you go. And it would take about a pound of boar bristles per brush. And what they would do is they would make this huge brush, use it to whitewash walls so that your paintbrush bristles got nice and softened from use. And then you would take that apart and make smaller brushes. And again, he says use wax thread to tie it. And there's no ferrule to this one. You'll see this. There's a couple of drawings in manuscripts that show. It's just kind of bristles tied to a wooden handle. Oil. So they did start oil painting about this time. And Cennini gives you 2 ways that you can make your oil for different things. First of all, if you boil it over a fire, be very careful. Do this outside. Don't do it inside. It can start a fire. It takes about 1 to 4 pounds of oil. Slowly take it down to about half. And this is better for mordants, which is applying gilding. You can also cook your oil in the sun, and this is the better one for using for oil paints. In a bronze or copper basin, just leave it out there in a Leo sun. We're not quite sure what this means, whether it's a sunny day or sometime in the summer. But again, you're just leaving it until it is about half as much as it was before. Flour paste, good for bookbinding, also for attaching tin to parchment and for making stencils. So again, they didn't do everything all on their own. They didn't freehand everything. You don't have to either. Process, heat water to almost boiling. Add your sieved flour so that there's no chunks. Let it boil, and you can add a little bit of salt to stop it from spoiling. And mordant for gilding again. Okay, so generally, you're using this for decorations and clothing borders so that you can add a little bit of gold there. Boiled linseed with a little bit of lead white and verdigris, add a little bit of varnish. Garlic! If you're going to do this, please do it outside. I did it in the house, and our house smelled not pleasantly of garlic, but like weapons grade garlic. So do this outside. Peel 2 or 3 bowls full of garlic. If you go to like Sam's Club, you can get a whole bag of already peeled garlic, which is great. Crush it, strain it, and then you can add a little bit of lead white in Armenian bowl, or just leave out the lead white if you want to avoid using something poisonous. Put in a bowl, and Cennini says to add a little urine, and you're going to see urine added a lot to things in period. If you read like pigment manuals and that kind of stuff, it's a quick, easy way for either uric acid or ammonia. Shell gold. If you look, shell gold is very expensive. So if you want to make your own, save the little bits that you use, that you brush away from gilding, or get some cheaper shell gold. Just make sure it's pretty high quality gold leaf. Mull about 10 to 20 pieces of gold leaf on your grinding slab, and a lot of places say to mull with egg glaire or with gum arabic, and that'll help it stick to your paper or that kind of stuff. And that is what I have prepared. I tend to talk a little bit quick. So if anybody has any questions, now is a good time.
If you're adding the mulled gold to fabrics, were those intended to be laundered, or just more like a drapery that you wouldn't really put any other hardware onto?
Yeah, I'm not assuming this is going to be your, if it's going to be worn, it's going to be something that is not worn often, because gum arabic is water soluble. Glare is a little bit less so, but it will go away after a while. So if you are laundering it, it would be a very light kind of spot clean kind of thing. But they do have a lot of like banners and stuff that they say you can gild on, and all sorts of other things like stone, and yeah, they were slapping gold on everything.
So if you don't want to use urine to make your garlic glare, what would you suggest replacing it with?
I have a lot of people say that you can just use garlic glare on its own. It is extremely sticky. I have a little bit in my gilding box, and when it spills, it sticks. So you can just use it on its own. You may have to dilute it a little bit, and it keeps forever. Also, if you make egg glare, you don't have to worry about refrigerating it. You don't have to worry about it spoiling. Old glare is great for gilding. And for egg glare, for anybody who's interested in this kind of stuff, you're taking egg whites, you mix them up until they form stiff peaks, let them sit overnight, and you will have the crunchy bit on top and goo on the bottom. The goo on the bottom is what you want. And just kind of pour that off and keep it forever. I don't think it stinks any more than my garlic glare does. So it's okay if it quote unquote spoils.
We have a question from Javon. I have not heard of garlic glare before. Do you mix it yourself? Is it similar to egg glare?
It's just garlic juice. So, but again, very sticky just on its own. It's used in similar places that you would use egg glare, more for the gilding than for like making paints. Probably a little, and definitely used for gilding on manuscripts. I've definitely seen it there.
All right, thank you, very interesting.
I have a question. It's Aspasia. I have a question regarding that garlic glare again, or the garlic again. I'm just starting to learn about gilding, and I've done gilding once on a scroll, and I used glue because I tried making glare and it was horrific. It didn't work. When you're using your garlic, can you use it? I use Perg. Can you use it directly onto Perg? Like, I guess I'm not really understanding with the garlic. So you just crush it and you leave it, and then you use the juice. Is
You
that right?
crush it, and then squeeze the juice out. And I usually use like a dish towel, the flour sack dish towels, and just squeeze it real hard. You're not going to get a whole lot of juice out of there, but what you do is going to be very sticky. The longer you leave it, the stickier it'll get. And just brush that on and let it dry a little bit, and then stick your gold on there.
That sounds like it would be way easier than the honey and the water and the glue and the paint and the. I think I'll have to try this.
And gilding is not easy. It's very temperamental. It's very dependent on your humidity, where you are. So it may work, it may not. I haven't gotten it to work really good yet, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Adverse reaction. So I mostly do non-toxic pigments. I do a lot of lake pigments, and I do some mineral pigments and some earth pigments. The one I might not use garlic with like orpiment or something that is reactive with sulfur, because there may be a little bit of sulfur in there.
Okay. Orpiment. I heard that word. I don't think I have it. I've heard it. I don't know that I have that.
That one is an arsenic one, and it is a beautiful yellow, and you see it a lot in Celtic manuscripts, not so much later in period, because it did react with a lot of things, especially lead white.
that's why I heard of it, because I did 2 scrolls with the Book of Duro and they talked about orpiment and I changed that.
Yeah, yeah. And lead white reacted to a few things, but it was the white. It was the one that was nice and opaque and the prettiest.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so orpiment, sulfide mineral. So it may be like lead white or something that would react to sulfur, but mostly what I use for making paints is like gum arabic. It's a lot easier to reconstitute when I am making paints.
Hmm. When you're making your paints, is it called a muller or a muller? So I didn't have $40 to spend on a muller, and I went to Amazon and they had these 6 glass somethings.
Yeah, the fermentation weights.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now, but when I got it home, I noticed that it has sort of a concave thing in the center. Is that going to be a problem? I have not started making my own pigments yet. I was gifted a bunch from Kit Wellner and
Yep.
from the Known World. And so I'm just really excited about starting.
If it's pretty pronounced, it may interfere a little bit.
Okay.
If it's more slight, what I would do is get some silicon carbide and use that to kind of flatten out your glass a little bit. And that's just kind of used as an abrasive. You put a little bit on your grinding slab and take your muller and just kind of do circular motions like you're making paint, and that'll grind it down a little bit. I've got a bunch of those fermentation weights and they seem to work pretty good.
Oh, good. I also saw somebody used a slab of marble, like I guess a cutout from some sink or something, and they cut it down to size and used it. I thought that was pretty smart too.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kind of sneaky things you can do. I've used glass doorknobs. I found some glass coffee tampers, and that one is perhaps my nicest one, but I can't find those anymore. And that was like $20. But yeah, my new ones for my classes are going to be the fermentation weights.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and if you haven't joined Period Pigment Palette Facebook group, please do. If you're interested in that kind of stuff. And for like the blackberry one, I've got a link on my website. It's super easy. And if you have blackberries going bad, it's incredibly easy to start with. Just crush up your blackberries, squeeze the juice out, a little bit of alum, and I made clothlets with that. And what a clothlet is just a pigment infused cloth. And I dipped mine in alum a couple of times, let them dry, and then dipped them in the blackberry. If you can, do it twice if you have enough juice so that you really get it nice and saturated. And when you're ready to use it, add a little bit of water, maybe a touch of gum arabic, and you have a nice wash. They're not going to be very light fast, so they're going to fade in light. But if you're just doing a drawing to practice drawing and shading, it's fantastic. And you'll see Da Vinci use a lot of washes. some ink washes, and I think I saw like some buckthorn or something for yellows, and saw some greens and blues. Yeah, if you're looking for a master to practice drawing from, I highly suggest Da Vinci. He's got it going on. And there's a lot out there. I can't remember which museum it is right now, but they have hundreds of his drawings up. Somewhere in Britain.
So if you just wanted to get started, you've got nothing, you're not really sure where to start, what would be your first go-to?
If you just want to start practicing drawing, I would try out Silver Point. I believe you can buy already prepared papers. If you want to mix up your own grounds, you can, or you can just get prepared grounds from Natural Pigments. If you want to go really cheap, just get a coil of like 925 silver wire, and you can draw with that. Just cut it into a little bit of a stick, and you can use that. And as thick as you can, really, because a lot of silver wire is so thin. And I highly suggest the panel. Just put a little bit of your grounds or bone ash. The bone ash is really cheap, like $5 for a big bag. And mix that with saliva and let it dry. Try drawing. And I believe that would be something that you would just stick in your bag and go for a walk and, find a place that inspired you and start drawing. And you can prepare a panel really quick and start at it.
Oh, very cool. We're about a quarter to the hour. We can stay with more questions, or we can wrap things up.
Yeah, if you want to get lunch.
All right. An excellent timing with the little one. They always know when your attention is elsewhere.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So thank you so much, Marion. And I'm going to end the recording. Y'all are welcome to hang out and chat a little bit more.